Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Columbus and Jim Geraghty.
And my name is Greg Knapp. I'm in for Greg Columbus. You can find out more about me and get a free gift at my website, gregorybknapp.com. And I also have a new podcast out. It's on Apple Podcasts. Find your purpose, live your passion. Links are in the show notes below. And I'm joined by Jim Geraghty, senior political correspondent of National Review. His Twitter handle, at Jim Geraghty. That's also in the show notes. And this is the Three Martini Lunch. All right, we will start with the good. It's a shocker. Shocker. The Democrats have discovered good old Joe Biden is, get this, old. And he doesn't always watch what he says. In fact, if elected, Joe Biden would be 78 upon entering the White House, making him the oldest president ever to take office. And Jim, those first two debates, I don't want to be elderist, if that's the word I can coin.
Ageist, yes.
Ageist, there you go. Well, I had to do something new. Yeah. All right, so I don't want to be ageist or elderist, but he looks, how you have your dad or your grandpa that you haven't seen him a while, and then you see him and you're like, oh man, when did my dad get old? That's how he looked, didn't he?
He did. And, those of us who've been, looking forward to the 2020 race for a while and knew that there were a variety of Democrats out there, knew that these were probably going to be the two issues that would be biggest for Joe Biden. One was the age, 76 now, 78 when he would take the oath if he was elected. And the other one is, the long history of Joe Biden not watching his mouth, and whether you want to call them gaffes, whether you want to call them inappropriate statements. We all remember Stand Up Chuck, all that kind of stuff. Which is, sometimes it's amusing, but sometimes it does not. It can go off message, and it can very much, distract from whatever message he wanted. So today, front page New York Times, Kitty Gluck and Jonathan Martin. Lo and behold, Biden supporters are nervous. They thought he was showing his age, appeared slow off the mark, uncertain about how to counterpunch Kamala Harris. His supporters are saying he looked like he was a step slow. If he comes back strong in the next few debates, I think he'll be fine. But I do think he'll look kind of old in this debate. Believe it or not, here we are at the second debate. I think you can genuinely say Joe Biden, if he's not feeling the pressure, he should be feeling the pressure. Because, one, you can have an off night. Okay, it's everybody's, opening night audition, fine. I think if he has another second one, I think all of a sudden it becomes a completely different Democratic primary.
I absolutely do. I think you remember a few of these martinis ago, I told you I do not think he will be the nominee. I don't think he's far enough left anymore, which is crazy that I say that. And I think he is too old and too many gaffes. Look, it was Joe being Joe when he's the VP to Obama. But when other Democrats want to win, then it's not Joe being Joe anymore. Now he's being treated like a Republican for what he says. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing to really be scared about. I don't know if you saw this, Jim. Vanity Fair has a piece that Joe should really be worried about because polling at less than 1%, Kirsten Gillibrands now says she's been digging up dirt on Biden and she's ready to unleash at this debate.
Wow. He should be ready for that. I think in the last debate, Gillibrand was every chance she got, she was trying to jump in there, feeling like she was going to get easily snubbed by the moderators and not enough questions come her way. But I think the really interesting thing is that, the context of this New York Times piece, the question of growing concerns about, let's say Biden gets the nomination, how would he do up on stage with Trump? And we all know that Trump is a, relentless debater, constantly attacks, off the cuff, but much more effective than Hillary Clinton expected. And not the kind of situation you can stumble or be slow or look off your game. And I think that, a bunch of Democrats are starting to feel kind of nervous about this, but we will see how it shakes out. The last thing you want to do if you're Joe Biden is live down to the nickname Sleepy Joe.
Absolutely. And that's something, love him or hate him or however you feel about him, Trump is awesome at getting something stuck in your head with a nickname, right? What he did with Lion Ted or Carly Fiorina, look at that face, or Rubio, little Marco. I mean, he finds something that you're kind of thinking in your head that you kind of want to dismiss, and then he puts it in there, and then every time you see that person, that's all you think about. Low energy Jeb, whatever it is, you start to go, yeah, I guess he is low energy Jeb. And then every time you see him, you think that. And he could easily do that with Joe.
Yeah. And he is, this way, if Democrats have a, perhaps healthy wariness about who they put up against Trump, and we will see more this week. Another important step in that process continues.
And another part of it is for martini number 2, the bad martini. Rahm Emanuel has some good advice out, sounding the alarm. And Jim, I think you were saying you hope no Democrats follow it, because he wrote a piece in Medium, and here's the headline: "A memo to our Democratic presidential candidates: don't make Detroit's debates a repeat of Miami." And here's a pull quote to set you up, Jim. It says this: "If you're going to evict Donald Trump from the White House and secure the country's future, you have to replicate what the last 2 Democratic presidents did so successfully in their campaigns. You need to unite all primary voters. There's a reason Trump gleefully tweeted, 'That's the end of that race,' during the first debate." That was after they said they were going to all pay for illegal aliens to get free health care. "Too often you succumb to chasing plaudits on Twitter, which closed the door on swing voters in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. If you win the nomination in a way that forecloses a path to victory in the general election, we will lose, and your name will go down in infamy." That's Rahm Emanuel.
Yeah. I selected this one as the bad martini because it will be bad for conservatives and Republicans if Democrats listen to this. Rahm Emanuel is the guy who was kind of the architect of the Democrats take over the House back in 2006. By the way, one of the candidates from back then, Kirsten Gillibrands. And they did not do it based on, hard lefty types. They did it on Heath Schuler types who were emphasizing how they were pro-gun rights and not like Nancy Pelosi and things like that. Now, we can argue how much those Democrats actually turned out to be moderates. I think the 2010 midterms indicate that when push came to shove, they were willing to take votes that their districts didn't like. But, Rahm Emanuel knows a thing or two about how to win places that are swing states. And he gets, a little bit later in this little essay on Medium, he says, gives the Democrats really good advice that I hope they do not take. Quote, "When you're looking into the camera at the coming debate, imagine you're speaking to a voter in Grand Rapids or Green Bay who holds 2 core beliefs in her head. 1, that the economy is okay, not bad, and 2, that Trump's presidency is worse than bad. Showing that you understand those 2 points will yield electoral gold. You need to convince that voter to fire a president who is acting like the leader of a circus rather than the leader of the greatest nation on earth. While at her kitchen table, explain why you're the candidate best equipped to secure her family's future. Her vote is how you win the nomination in the White House. Everything else is secondary." I think it's safe to say that a bunch of these candidates have not been competing for those working class voters in that upper Midwest area. They've been, looking for the plaudits from Brooklyn and San Francisco and the deep blue parts of the country, because that's where a lot of donors are, and that's probably where the most tuned in activist left folks are. But that is not, I suspect, where the Democratic primary votes are overwhelmingly going to be, and that certainly is not how you win the general election.
Couldn't agree more. I think I saw a piece by Michael Goodwin, the New York Post, and he was saying that the research is showing in these elections that the people on the farthest left are really the white progressives, not the minorities. So even when you're talking about slavery reparations and some of these other far left ideas, they're really aiming more at this smaller white progressive audience than the traditional Democratic voting blocks. And they're alienating a lot of those traditional voting blocks. And hey, we'll see if they listen to Rahm or not.
Yeah, the Trump campaign must be hoping that they do not.
Yeah, absolutely. So here comes crazy martini number 3. We've got Adam Schiff complaining about Robert Mueller's testimony. Now, it's interesting because there's 2 congressmen talking about this big time. Congressman Jerry Nadler, he's the one that wanted this thing to happen with Mueller coming in the most. He's happy. This went great. He praised Mueller. I don't know what he was watching. And then Adam Schiff comes on, and we've got a little audio of him talking about this with Chuck Todd. Listen to this.
Was there any part of Director Mueller's testimony you found unsatisfying?
Look, I wish that he had testified in more narrative fashion, that the words didn't need to be coaxed from him as much as they did.
You were talking, you were hoping it would bring it alive, is what you said, I think, last week, right?
And I think that it did, but it came alive, I think, more through very short questions and very short answers rather than a great deal of description from the witness.
I think somebody needed to bring Robert Mueller alive is what I was worried about, Jim.
This way, it is one of those things where you ever see somebody and your friend does a painting or something like that, and it's not that good. And you're looking for a way to praise it.
Right.
you're kind of stretching and groping around and all that stuff. It came alive through very short questions and very short answers, rather than a great deal of description from the witness. Look, first of all, no Democrat should have been all that surprised by that. First, from Mueller's reluctance to testify, and his statement in his short press conference at the end of May, saying, "Look, my report is my testimony. I don't plan on going beyond that report. We said what we had to say in the report. So you shouldn't have expected any bombshells or any dramatic revelations or something like that." So Democrats were completely convinced that having Mueller on camera saying things that had been in the report, that had been hashed out on, in the newspapers and on cable news and on websites and on social media, when the report came out, that this was going to really change things. And I think it's safe to say that so far, no, it really hasn't. And that Schiff and folks like that are kind of, now having to say, well, he only had a certain amount of time for his answers and stuff like that. Look, right before the hearings began, I remember somebody had said to Axios, some unnamed Democratic committee source said, this could be the most important hearings of the decade. The first thing is, Greg, I remember the Kavanaugh hearings. That seemed like a big deal, don't you think?
That was pretty big. Yeah.
Before, so it may not be the most important hearings in a year, never mind of the decade. And then I think, if you build up the hype to it, people expect something huge and surprising and makes you say, oh my goodness, did you see this? And they didn't get that. And so I think they did Mueller no favors. They did themselves no favors. And they find themselves with, a fizzle yet again. Schiff had also made some comments indicating that he was frustrated that Mueller had not gone through all the possible money laundering threads in the investigation. I remember sitting there remember when Robert De Niro was playing this guy as on Saturday Night Live as basically Samuel Gerard in The Fugitive, right? Hard target search of every outhouse, doghouse, and that he was the most determined guy. And all of a sudden he's Mr. Magoo. All of a sudden Mueller can't find any of this stuff, and he dropped the ball. He didn't look hard enough. The about faces we see, I think, are pretty cynical.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you see how it looked like he wasn't familiar with his own report, I think it gives more impetus to the investigation into how did all this happen? How did the investigation start? Who was really running it? Was there bias involved? Were there things being left out when they went for the FISA warrants that the FISA court didn't know about? Were things being misrepresented? I think that may be coming out, but the last question still is, okay, if we've got Congressman Nadler saying this was great, and I saw several Democrats saying this shows that we need to impeach, and then you've got Schiff and Nancy and some of the others saying, hey, maybe we should actually focus on an election. The quickest way to get Trump out of the White House is to win the next election. Where do you think this goes with the Democrats between now and Election Day?
I was going to say, look, this is actually my suspicion is that obviously the closer you get to Election Day, the sillier it looks to attempt to impeach the president. I don't know. My suspicion is that we keep hearing those reports that the Inspector General report over the Department of Justice is going to have really critical things to say about Comey and stuff like that. That would be a bit of a stink bomb for the Democrats. They would basically add fuel to Trump's argument that there's been a witch hunt out to get him from the beginning. We'll see what that IG report actually says. Worth noting that IG report, I believe, was supposed to be out in late spring. Late July does not strike me as late spring. It's taken a while.
Yeah.
My suspicion, it would not be surprising in the slightest if by the time autumn 2020 rolls around, the Democratic candidate does not want to argue about the Comey firing, does not want to argue about the effort to impeach, does not want to argue about Russian collusion and all that kind of stuff, or obstruction of justice. And Trump does, because Trump thinks he's got hey, they've been out to get me from the beginning, and that's, anything I've failed to accomplish, it's because of that. And Democrats, if they're wise, referring back to our Rahm Emanuel discussion, if they're wise, they'll be looking forward and trying to say, hey, remember back in 2017? Remember when he fired Comey? That was terrible. When, well, it doesn't help the fact that Comey is acting more and more like, a member of the resistance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm with you that if you really want Trump out, whether if you're a Democrat, seems like the best thing to do is run a great campaign and win the election. And it's hard to do that and focus on what you're going to do for America if all you're doing is looking backwards. And I have a feeling that Nancy will make them figure that out fairly soon. All right, that is the 3 Martini Lunch. My name is Greg Knapp, and for Greg Corombos, Jim Geraghty, senior political correspondent of National Review. His Twitter handle is @Jim Geraghty. Find out more about both of us in the show notes. Hope you have a great one.